Hello and welcome to the Green Profit Academy Pros podcast. This show digs into the challenges in growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit. I'm Christeen.
And I'm Steve Bousquet. We are the green industry experts in profit, growth, and leadership. Hey, Christeen, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's like second summer here in Connecticut. It's 80 degrees 2 days in a row. The third week of October, we're like turning our air conditioners back on.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite some weather over there in Connecticut. We've got some nice weather here, but we've been kind of floating around, the 70s, nice little 70s band there with the temperature. And it actually feels like fall.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Which is nice because it's my favorite season. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always feel like, since I moved to Colorado, I was so spoiled with kind of the San Francisco Bay Area falls weathers, like the season. It was just so perfect. And then since I moved to Colorado, I don't feel like there's always been a fall every year. So this year I'm like, ooh, we have a fall. Kind of excited.
What do you think of summer right into winter?
It just seems kind of short, like it bounces back between, some semi-warm days and cold days and maybe some wind and rain. And, it's not just that the leaves are turning, the weather's kind of perfect, and you could just kind of go outside and, the air has like this crispness to it, but it's comfortable. So it's just like this different feeling.
Yeah.
So
sounds nice.
It is. Yeah, your guys' weather kind of reminds me of that sometimes too.
Yeah.
When I go out and visit you guys.
Yeah, we have great fall weather in New England.
Yeah.
Hey, today's podcast is going to be the 5 steps to ensure your pricing, markups, and margins are profitable. And that's one of the key factors that we run into pretty consistently when people reach out to us. They are behind on their something, right? Behind on their bills, behind on their pricing. And they might think that they need to offer new service, or something's not right. They don't know what. And it's our job to find out what that is. We give them different assessments to kind of highlight and discover and reveal the true challenge and true issue with their business, and not take a guess, right? Not just kind of off the cuff. We actually give them an assessment to identify that. In many, many times, 80% of the time, it usually has to do with their pricing and their margins and markups and their awareness around that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And I love this topic because our last episode, we talked about profit first and it being a cash management system, and, it really helping us see what are you spending in your business and where. And one thing I love about the assessment is we've been doing it for so long and have mastered the process of, the assessment and unpacking it to where now I feel like, and I felt like this for years, is the assessment tells me more than just what are you spending in your business. It tells me, is something off with your pricing or your margins or markups? And you're right. It's one of those typical, challenges in any business to where they might get away from it. They're not managing it. They're not tracking it. And their pricing strategy served their business 5 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was. And it just isn't serving it today. And sometimes we forget, we actually used to look at these numbers, right? We used to connect with them and track them and make sure that they were serving the company. So, yeah, I'm excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, and it doesn't take too many quarters to get off track. Just like homeowners insurance or business insurance, sometimes, if it goes up 1% to 3%, and then your fuel goes up 1% to 3%, and then labor goes up 3%, next thing you know, that's all creep, right? And your margins are off 3%, but really they're off 6%, because to get a 50% margin, you have to have that 6% markup. So now if that happens 2 years in a row, Now you're off 12%.
Ouch.
And, some of that can happen before you. So that's only 8 quarters. Now you're off 12%. And that's not very long. I was talking to a company last week, and they had some pricing, like, they didn't want to raise their pricing, but they were increasingly every year less profitable. And one of the things I shared with them, I'm going to be 60 this month. Happy birthday to me. But about 3 times a week, pretty consistently, I'm shocked at how much something costs, right? And it's because I'm, still in the 80s, 90s, like, how much, what? And so a lot of times my pricing mindset is 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and it's not the 90s and 80s, right? It's 2024. So what, Subway sandwich is not $5 for a foot long anymore. It's probably $12 or $15, right? So, it's today's modern prices are not what we are used to. So some of our mindset needs to shift to a more modern mindset. And then the other thing, there's pre-COVID and post-COVID. And the pricing is changed, right? Labor has changed, fuel, everything. It's a new world. It's a new economy. So how often does that happen? It could happen, like I said, every 8 quarters, could be a 12% shift in the business. So we need to pay attention to this pretty frequently, if not quarter by quarter, at least, every semi-annually.
Yeah. And it's easy to get lost in the weeds. You're talking about 8 quarters, right? Which is 2 years. And it's not hard to get soaked up into other parts of the business and sucked in and lose sight of some of these things that, maybe you used to do at a different level, but things have changed. The business has grown. You have different responsibilities, and you just kind of run out of capacity to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, which it has happened to me in my business a couple of times. And I've had to establish systems to make sure, I keep track of it. So we're going to revisit this topic today. And for those of you who are listening, and this might be the perfect time for you to look at your pricing strategy, especially as we're going into the new year, raising your prices before the new year starts and looking at this. It's a great opportunity to make sure that next year is different than this year. And it could start with the margins and markups in your pricing strategy.
And one of the things that I'll share is getting the pricing right really opens up a lot of opportunities with the business, because you can only be so efficient, right? You can only route so efficiently. You can only buy so efficiently. And no matter how good you're at it, you're only going to be 80% efficient in all the other things. So having your pricing lined up really just gives you another avenue of profitability, and just paying attention to that is so key. So let's kick it off. What's the number one? Or we'll start with the first one.
Yep, it's understanding your costs, right? And I love talking about this one because I'm always like, what are you spending? What are you spending your money on? What does that look like? What's your ROI? So, we're looking at direct costs in your business, which is things like material and labor. It could even be equipment. What are you doing to produce the services that you provide? Direct costs. And then indirect costs. And these are things like, that are overhead. So it's going to be utilities, rent, maybe administrative salaries, things like that. So these are your indirect costs, things that you're paying to keep your business going round day to day that is not associated directly with providing the services. So that's the first step, is understanding what those are in your business.
And direct cost and indirect cost, it can be sometimes getting in the weeds with those, right? People go, well, is this pencil I'm using an indirect cost or direct cost, right? If it's under $1, don't get hung up on it too much, right? So get as close as you can. I think the most important thing is identifying in what it is and sticking with it, right? Mm-hmm. So is it going to be the direct cost going to be used in producing a dollar, or is it going to be used to support the dollar in the office? And or is it a computer? But just don't get like, people will get stuck and not do this sometimes because they can't decide where the little tiny nooks and crannies are going to go. Don't get hung up on that. Get 98% close and keep moving forward with this, because just understanding the majority of it is going to actually get you further ahead than being worried about every single penny.
Yeah. And we have, make sure you go to the show notes, because I have a really great tool for you to use to go through this process and assess, this strategy that we're talking about today. And Steve's right. Like, don't get in the weeds on it. The direct cost is what supports your service being delivered, right? The labor, someone out in the field, the truck that, they're driving, the equipment that they're using, the gas for the equipment that they're using, the materials they're putting on, your customers' lawns or in their landscape. So again, those are direct costs, and everything else is pretty much going to fall in indirect costs. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. And later we can make it perfect, right? It's a journey. Like, we don't just arrive and everything's built and it's beautiful and it works perfectly. But as we work towards getting us there, assess those direct and indirect costs so you know what it is that you're tracking and how much things are.
Yeah, and those are going to be outlined on your P&L in your chart of accounts.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a nice little trick to use, is if you have a great chart of account structure. If you're struggling with that, I invite you to go to our Green Profit Toolbox, and you can find a sample chart of account structure for a lawn care and landscape business that's simplified to where you can see, okay, these are the direct costs, these are the indirect costs, and it has a really great structure done for you. But that is a quick, kind of tip there, is if you have your chart of account structure and you're allocating, so you're tracking these expenses regularly to those accounts, it's going to tell you exactly what those indirect and direct costs are for your business.
Yeah. And if use the toolbox, if you have a chance, and there's some great free tools in there to look at that. Chart of accounts are super important. Make sure, so there's above the line, which is your direct cost, and below the line, which is your indirect cost. So when you hear an accountant or a business coach say what's above the line and below the line is direct costs, below the line is indirect costs. So that's kind of like industry jargon that you'll hear. Next is determining what your markup needs to be, right? So we want to know how much we need to mark up things. So how do we determine that?
So the definition of a markup is the percentage added to your cost to cover overhead and profit. So there's a formula that you can use, and I'll share the formula. And Steve coaches, our clients around this all the time. If you're confused about it, don't feel bad. So many people are confused about it. Sometimes I'm even like, wait a minute, which markup? Yes, that's right. Getting it right in my head. So the formula for markup is the markup percentage is the sales price minus the cost. And then you take that and you divide it by cost and times it by 100. And that's what's going to give you that percentage. So, you want to compare that to, looking at it and calculating it to, your pricing model. Your desired profit margin is something you want to keep in mind, like how much of a profit margin do you want to have, right? Do you want, a fixed percentage? Do you want, kind of like a sliding scale depending on the services and the materials you're marking up? And also, I would say, look at industry standards, right? So there's a lot of companies out there that provide this type of information that say, hey, in this area, because they do all the research and you get these amazing reports back. They say, hey, these are, some of the standards of what we're seeing. But even though if you're looking at industry standards or competitive pricing, you want to make sure that your markup is supporting your profit margin.
And it does get confusing to do this, but if you can understand this, it's hard to do it on a podcast. It's really a visual thing, but sitting down and understanding it. And I will say that 80% in the green industry, we don't mark up our materials and our labor and our subs enough. And people go, I marked it up 20%, so I'm making a lot of money. Well, 20% markup gives you like less than a 15% margin, right? So that doesn't really contribute even to your overhead. So to get to a 50% margin, you need to mark it up 100%, right? That's a quick, easy math. So 100% markup gives you a 50% margin. And, I have a cheat sheet. We have calculators, and then in our toolbox, you can also use, but typically a 50% margin is what you're shooting for. So on average, that's like the kind of the bottom of the barrel. Once you go to 40% margin, I call it the smoke alarm. And anything that's not being marked up at least 40%, now we're not really recovering enough to make it kind of like contribute to the overall business. So if we get a 15% margin, you're actually detracting from the business every time you do that. And so understanding how that contributes or detracts from the business is really important. Understanding what your markup is super, super important. Spend lots of time with that.
Yeah. And one of the common errors that we see when we're assessing a business is they don't mark up their equipment. So the equipment that they're not considering it in their pricing model, and they're just looking at it as kind of like an expense of, well, we have to, have this certain piece of equipment in order to do this job, but they're not looking at, the markup to make sure that the margin is there on their equipment. So they're really not making any money on that equipment. And that's a very common mistake that we've seen.
It is. So, and I did it for years, right? I was just like, oh, how do I pay for this equipment? I can pay for it this way. But business people look at equipment as an investment that they're going to get a return on investment for. It's like if you buy stock, you want to get a return on that investment. You don't just say, oh, yeah, you can use it today and I don't want any return on my investment, right? Because there's a inherent risk for buying that equipment and for hauling it around and for using it and beating it up and just replacing all of the parts and maintaining it, right? So, again, if you have to figure out what that piece of equipment costs you, how long it's going to last, how long does it take to maintain it? I mean, how much does it cost to maintain it? And then you can mark it up. And typically it's not as much as you'd think per hour. Some people will charge a rental fee, so they'll charge a daily rate for that piece of equipment, very similar to what the rental companies will charge. And some people are afraid to charge for their equipment because they're afraid they won't get the work. But I will tell you, I have not run into not one company that has gone out of business or doesn't have work because they charge for their equipment. As a matter of fact, it's usually the opposite. The people that are charging for the equipment usually, for some reason, have more work than they can handle, have been in business for a long time, and are profitable. So the correlation is much more stronger to being successful charging for your equipment than not charging for your equipment. And people that are not charging for their equipment typically have a hard time making their equipment payments, have a hard time keeping up with their equipment maintenance. They have a hard time replacing the equipment when it breaks. And it's just a struggle. So once you can identify how much your equipment costs and you can not only charge for it, but use it as a profit center, it changes the whole game of business.
Yeah. And I'll share a quick tip for this is if you've implemented some sort of, accounting software or sales software, there's a lot out there and they have done a fantastic job, I have to say, with the amount of software companies I've connected with in the lawn care and landscape industry. They are ahead of the curve with so many other industries and the way that they're building their software. You can put and build in your margins and your markups directly in the software to where you're creating a quote and it gets automatically calculated. So long game, get them into your estimating system. So that way, they're built in and they can't be adjusted. And in the short term, go get one of our calculators, run your numbers through it from the toolbox and see, where are you at and where do you want to be or need to be.
So I'll just give a really quick example on that. Let's say a Z spray, you figure it costs you $14 an hour to own it and run it. So you're going to mark it up 100%, to give you a 50% margin. So you're charging $28 an hour for that. So you're going to have a $28, right? Times 8 hours a day. So that's $224 a day, right? That's like a rental fee that if you had to go pay to rent it, that's what it'd be. So times 5 days a week, that's $1,120 a week. Now, if you didn't charge that in your pricing, you would be paying for that, not your customers. Now, the average tech's going to treat about 20 lawns a day. So he's going to treat about, let's say, 100 lawns a week. So that $1,120 divided by 100 lawns that week, let's say, so that's $11 a lawn.
And that's just for the equipment.
That's just for the equipment. But it's not a lot of money. So it's $11.20 for that lawn. So each lawn's paying for that, not you. But half of that is going to the company as, a markup. So the difference, it's over, 30 weeks, that's $30,000. Yeah. And that's how you see these companies that have nice equipment and well maintained, and you wonder how they can afford it. That's how they can afford it. They're charging that $11 per lawn, or it's not. So instead of being $80, they're $91. Mm-hmm. It's not. They're $160. Instead of being $70, they're $81. It's not that much of a difference, and that's the difference between having that nice equipment paid for and us not paying, so we can use that people's equipment, our equipment at people's houses.
Yeah.
So something to consider.
What's all right, next? So the next one is to set profitable prices, right? And it sounds easier than it is, because if you don't have a system and you're not looking, then you're not going to know. Not only do I find that there's a system that goes along with this, like a system or process that we have to have in place or, start using when it comes to a pricing strategy. But also there's some mindset around pricing involved in this. And we want to make sure that we are balancing our value that we're providing as a service to our pricing. Right? There could be a guy out there that's charging $50 a service, and, he's not communicating with his customers. He just shows up. The job isn't great all the time. Sometimes they don't show up, problem. And you provide the same service and you're charging $100 for that service, right? The value would be you show up on time, you communicate with the customer, you don't cause out these problems, your service is very transparent, you're responsive, there's all these things. And knowing that you bring that value to your market and that's what your ideal customers want, that needs to be considered into your pricing model, because I guarantee that people that want transparency, they want communication, they want reliability, they're going to pay more for it because it addresses other problems, right? It stops problems from happening. So making sure that you're looking at your business and understanding what value do we provide, what level of service, what makes it different from the competitor, and creating your pricing model around that. It's great to be aware of what your competitors are charging, but that doesn't mean that you match your competitors' pricing. You have to look at many other things to where you're bringing the value of your service and your business into your pricing model, and what you are delivering when it comes to your cost and your margins and markups as well.
Core Growth Strategies provides business growth management solutions through cloud accounting, bookkeeping, and strategic business consulting programs. Our team works with small businesses in lawn care and landscape and trade industries throughout the U.S. We increase our clients' business acumen by creating business performance transparency through financials and strategic advisement based on industry best practices and benchmarks. Our experienced team provides support, guidance, and coaching, thereby allowing our clients to connect with viable data and discover their own solutions. Core Growth Strategies programs and services are designed to get your business from where it is now to where you have always dreamed it to be. Visit us today at coregrowthstrategies.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Don't miss our exclusive limited time podcast special. Just mention promo code GPA Pro to any member of our team during your complimentary consultation, or enter the promo code on our site when you sign up for one of our online programs. That's promo code GPA Pro.
Yeah, and a lot of people are very price sensitive to what other companies are charging. The issue with that is do you even know if they know why they're charging what they're charging, right? So the best model I found is the model where you stick to your pricing based on your own numbers and don't pay attention to anybody else's numbers, and also your own customers' wants and needs. Because, one of the things psychology and offerings have found that the two most kind of satisfactory purchases for people are high-end purchases and really low-end bargain purchases. The least satisfaction is the middle. So if people buy high-end, they feel really good because they paid a lot of money for it. Usually it's high quality. They got a lot of attention. They got a lot of communication. They got a lot of detail. And typically they'll be back. It's a repurchase. It's a relationship-based experience. If it's a low-end, if it's a budget, they feel they got a deal, they got a bargain, they were smart. So both of those situations, they'll tell people about it. They'll share their experiences. That's the referral experiences on both the low and the high end. The middle or the value section gets the least amount of repeat business and referrals because they paid for what they got and they got what they paid for. And that was the expectation. So it's the middle kind of the road thing, middle, okay, communication, okay, product. And, so when we're choosing in our pricing and, we either have to be that real bargain or we have to be a little bit more premium. And depending on where you're going to be, you have to own those spaces, and if you're a really frugal, cheap person and you really identify with that, maybe that's a lane for you. It's really difficult to own that space because there's always somebody who's cheaper and more frugal than even you, right? But if you're going to be in the business for a long time, being a little higher end can have more advantages to that. So when you're pricing, look at your own numbers. I love that 65% gross profit margin. That's really how we're pricing stuff. And then there's some other things that you can price to be a little higher. And I also don't like to price things on a razor's edge. I like to give myself some room to take care of my customers so I don't have to worry about the little tiny things. It's built in there. We can go back and service our customers and take care of them or build it into the pricing. I'll give you an example. We know when we do a landscape installation, there's most likely going to be weeds that pop up at some time in the next 3 to 6 months. So we're building visits in to go back to make sure that the weeds are taken care of, that the flowers get deadheaded after they bloom. If there's any issue at all, we go back a couple of 3 times to make sure the landscape looks good, right? The plants are watered. And they just want the attention. They're willing to pay for that versus someone that just throws the landscape in to take off. Now there's a couple weeds in the bed or more weeds for whatever reason, or the blooms are past. Now they're all brown because the azalea flowers they're done, they're spent, but they just get hung on to the plant. And then the $15,000, $20,000 planting now all of a sudden doesn't look as good. So it's a different experience. So having that, now people are upset. I used to get upset when I got callbacks. And then I was like, well, what if I charge for it? And when I charged for it, people loved it. Like when we do lawn installations, it includes a full year's program the following year. And we're the only people that were offering that full year program. We'll come back, reseed it, we'll put fertilizer, insect control, weed control. We'll take care of you for another year, included in the install. Nobody else does that. And people were like, oh, we want to make sure that this investment is going to be taken care of. So those are kind of like, that goes along with the pricing model. So it's not always being cheaper. It's about taking care of the clients can be part of the pricing model.
Yeah. And when you say you build that in, what you're doing, and I just want to clarify this, is you're looking at the cost to provide those additional high service, offerings,
right,
and the time of labor and everything else that goes into them. And you're building them, you're bringing that into, in addition to the cost to, let's say, do an install or something like that. And then you're pricing it out completely. And I love that model because it's a value pricing model where it's like, hey, you get this and we're going to do this and come back 3 times, or whatever it is, or provide a year of service. And that's adding a whole nother, layer of value, but you're not the one eating it, right? It's something exactly that the customer's paying for. You're making a profit on it. It's built into your pricing strategy. And, you're making your customer extremely happy because they felt taken care of, cared for, that whatever they're investing their money in, you care about, its success just as much as they do. And they know they're going to see you again, because I know that's something in the trades industry. When someone shows up and does a job, there's like this, scarcity mindset to where like, oh, once they leave, that's it. It's going to be impossible to get them back here or to get a hold of them. But you're saying, hey, we're coming back. We're going to see you, on this date or whatever it is. So I think that's a great strategy. Building the cost in and your margins and markups around that is very important. And then there's also the, good, better, best, right? Which is another pricing strategy. But that's also, we're looking at margins and markups. And I know, Steve, you have a good, better, best program that you provide for your lawn care application.
Yeah, so we have our basic and our premium and then our all-American. And so the basic and the premium, there's not much, very much price difference. But the services are extremely different as far as what they get per offering. And then the all-American has a lot more products in it. And the pricing is, a lot more. It could be up to 30% more. And 65% of our customers will buy the most expensive offering that we have. So it's just one of those things. I think if we offered a all-American plus, people would buy that too. I think there's a certain portion of people that would buy that. So, the good, better, best is we also do that when we do landscaping. It could be, how many plants we put in, or it could be the size of the plants. Maybe we're going to do 10 gallons or instead of 5-gallon plants. So it's the same design, maybe bigger plants, or maybe we add more plants, or maybe we add boulders, or maybe we add a seat wall in with a patio. But there's ways to do that. When I first started doing that, I was like, people were buying the best. And I had only offered one price before. So if they said no to that one price. And now I was offering 3 prices. So when they would say, oh, I got to get other prices. Well, I just gave them other prices. I just gave them 3 prices. So they don't have to go get other prices. They just got other prices. And then they could go, oh, well, what about this? And what about that? They could add stuff together, and they just would spend so much more money. So it increased our sales just in landscaping by about 40% the first year we started doing that. And I was thinking this is 20 years ago, people are never going to buy that. They're never going to spend this. Time after time after time, they did it. It would be like, oh, and if you want to do cobblestone edging, that's going to be another $2,000. Oh yeah, we'll do that. Oh, and if you want to, we can do a 4-foot sidewalk, a 5-foot, 6-foot sidewalk. We could do a 6-foot sidewalk with a landing here, run the edging around the front and do the landscape lighting. That option's $18,000, or we can do the 4-foot sidewalk, no edging, no lighting. That's $5,000. No, we want the edging, the lighting, the $18,000. And I would be like, I could have been doing this for years and sold 60 less jobs a year and for more money.
Yeah. Yeah. You're building in your upsell automatically of, and giving them an idea of what their options are so that maybe they go less on one thing and they go higher on something else, which then spends more money, but they get more of what they want.
And the whole idea was when they're doing it, let's just do it. And why we're spending the money, let's just spend it, you know? So, and the other people were coming, giving them bids, they give them one price. So it was yes or no, no options.
Yeah.
No choices at all. And, if you go to the gas station, you have 3 choices, right?
Well, there's 4 now.
4
I went
choices
to the gas station a couple weeks ago and there was 4 and I'm like, what's this 4th? And it completely threw me off. And I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go with what I usually go with. But I had to think with which one it was because now they had one more.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, can you imagine going to the grocery store? There's only one cereal, and that's the thing when we put ourselves in front of a client, we're selling and we give them a yes or no, and there's no choice, it just doesn't make it. And, with Clifton Strengths, we know there's people that are maximizers. They always want to buy the best thing, and only giving them one choice and not giving them an opportunity to maximize, it just steals their thunder.
Yeah. All right. So step number 4, that was definitely a bonus on the pricing strategy. So thanks for sharing that, Steve. I think it will give some listeners some ideas, some opportunities to look into, rolling out 2025. So our next step is to monitor your margins. And, it's important to look at your profit margin because you're using it in strategic business decisions, right? And let's go over what the gross margin is. So it's sales revenue minus the cost of goods sold. And again, here's another word for it, right? Direct costs are your costs of goods sold. So that's on your chart of accounts. That's on your profit and loss statement. You're going to see those. It means pretty much the same thing. So the profit margin is the percentage of the selling price that is profit, right? So it pays for what you need to have paid for, and then it gives you more to save for that rainy day, right? So putting that profit away. The gross margin equation is the sales revenue minus cost of goods sold. So you're looking at whatever your revenue and you're minusing that cost of goods sold or those direct costs. And this is, a huge part in making business decisions because, it's going to help you decide, do we add another department? Do we add another service? Do we, hire more people? Do we have the, margin to support that? What does that look like?
Yeah, knowing your gross margins, that was the biggest game changer for my business and understanding like every service that we offered, I need to know the gross profit margin. I need to know the gross margin on every service. And that's why we started eliminating services. And I also need to know how much it takes, how much equipment it takes to generate that margin. Because if I'm spending 400 grand to generate this gross margin, and I can spend 5,000 to generate a gross margin, then now it's 2 different conversations. Because the ROI on that is substantially different, right? But understanding just the gross margin contribution to your business is crucially important. And so when we're looking at our financial reports, that's one of the biggest conversations we're always talking about, always looking at it. And we're doing it job by job, service by service. And we talk about it all the time in the company because we know if we hit those margins, everything else works out.
Yeah. And this is what I call profit centers, right? To where if we're monitoring that margin on those services that we provide, we can figure out which service do we provide that we have, the best margin on, and which is important. And this is something, we do at Core when we're working with our clients or at GPA, on the accounting side and at GPA on the coaching side, where we'll talk about, if they're like, oh, I'm going to add pest control, to my business, or I'm going to start doing this or that, or whatever it is, that's the first thing I think of is okay, well, what's your margins on the services you're offering now? Which is basically what's your return on investment is what we're asking. And then if somebody's wants to add something, then it's, from my perspective, it's logical, right? And responsible to run through that process to look at, well, what's going to be the margin on this service that we are going to add? What does that look like? So making sure that you're tracking that gross margin is important.
And like you said, adding another service, where are your margins now? And if your margins aren't where they need to be, let's get those margins where they need to be before we start investing in another service, right? Because another service means we need skills, marketing, we need capital, we need equipment, we need all kinds of other mindsets around that new service. I see some of my competitors in my market. Every time I turn around, they're offering robotic hillside mowing, mold control. They always, I don't even know, every other month they have some new service and they are always like undercutting us by like a third or 2/3. And on whatever, now they're in lawn care and they're doing that rather poorly, but then I turn around, now they're in like whatever, chimney sweeping. It's just like, so they're desperately trying to find something to do profitably. But if they just picked like their business that they were in and just found a way to do that profitably, instead of adding a service a month or every other month, they're doing some new thing trying to be profitable. That would be a much more logical business sense to me. It might be more fun to have all this new stuff that they're always doing. But I find profitability to be much more fun than that. And my family and friends and company find the profitability to be more enjoyable. So before adding a new service to find more profitable, I would challenge you to find the profitability in what you're already doing.
Yeah. So look at those gross margins, when it comes to your sales revenue for those services, and then the cost of goods sold or direct cost related to those services that you're providing. The other margin that I'm sure you've heard about is net margin, which the net margin is after all expenses, in the business, right? The direct and indirect costs, any sort of interest that you might be paying, taxes, things like that are paid. So the net margin is what's left after subtracting all the operating expenses, the interest or taxes from your gross margin. So just, to quickly touch on this, a net margin is your which equals your gross margin. So it's the gross margin minus the operating expenses plus the interest and taxes. So you'll typically see this at the very bottom of your profit and loss statement, and it will show you how much you do or do not have left over, which is the net margin. So you also want to pay attention to that. And we've talked about this, before, about like, what is a healthy, net margin, because you need a net margin because that money has a job to do. Once it's done on your profit and loss statement and it pays for all the direct and indirect costs, well, you have liabilities in your business. And what's left over has to go pay those liabilities. But we want to make sure that whatever those liabilities that it pays, there's still money left over. So that's why you want that higher net profit margin.
Right. So after that net margin is figured out, it has to go over the balance sheet and go to work, right? Has to pay for the equipment payments, any kind of like owner's distribution, especially if it's an LLC. If it's an S corp, the owner should be taking a regular paycheck out on the balance on the P&L, but also distributions on the balance sheet. Also, retained earnings is going to be held on the balance sheet. Capital improvements come out of that net. So there's a job that net margin has to do. It's not ours. We don't get to keep that. A lot of people confuse that with, oh, that's my net profit. That's what I'm keeping. And it is not. It has a job. And also savings, right? That retained earnings. That's referring to that. Like, so we want to make sure that we have a savings. So we're not like, oh my gosh, the truck needs brakes, but we don't have any money, or something happens and we don't have 10 or 20 grand to float us. We have to always dipping into our credit line or a credit card, which we've all done. And we know how painful it is to pay off credit cards.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that we'll look at is we'll look at gross margins and net margins when somebody shares their financials, because it's telling us a lot. It's telling us, okay, their pricing's off, or, what they're spending on direct and indirect cost is more than what they should spend based off of the services that they're providing. And that could be, too many people, too much equipment, inefficiencies in delivering. There's all kinds of symptoms that are there because when your margins and your gross margin and net margin is not at a healthy percentage, it's your business telling you, hey, we have a problem and it's been happening for a while. Let's look at these other areas.
Yeah, it's a trend.
Yep. All right. So number 5, Steve.
Regularly review your pricing strategy. And this is like put it on the calendar stuff. This isn't like kind of get around to it sometime, and review with someone that you have to meet. So have an accountability partner. This is like the gym partner, or your doctor for your annual physical, or your accountant. This is someone that is not going to let you blow this meeting off. You have to have someone that you're going to meet with and review this information, and the accountability of this can literally change the trajectory of your business. Making sure that we don't go off the rails for 4, 5, 8 quarters, really, because once we go off the rails financially for 8 quarters, then we have to play catch up. And instead of moving forward, we're just trying to get back into step in the line, and then we can play catch up. And you're going to miss some opportunities. And we'll share that since I've been really regularly watching my numbers, and I've taught my team to do it. They do it without me now. They have the landscape manager has a meeting with the business manager and the bookkeeper. I just see the reports. They go over the numbers. And since then, they were struggling to get the gross profit margin up, and it took 3 years to get it up to where we wanted to be, but they're there right now. That landscape has the highest gross profit margin ever. In the lawn care, we aim for that 65% gross profit margin. And all of our pricing is based on that. All of our labor, everything's based on that. And we've nailed it year after year after year. So tracking that, and it gives us the ability to pay our people really well. It gives us the ability to take care of our customers. It gives us the ability to take care of the people that take care of us.
Yeah. And to take care of the business, which takes care of the people. And that as a leader, and as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, it's our responsibility. If we're going to own a business or we're going to run a business, it's our responsibility to ensure that it's profitable. And it really starts with making sure your pricing strategy is dialed in, because if it's dialed in, then you can go to the other areas where your company's telling you we're having a problem. There's a problem. It's a labor problem. It's a efficiency problem. It's, a maintenance problem. Whatever it is, you can start looking in those areas and fixing it. But knowing that your pricing strategy is dialed in and correct and being reviewed on a regular basis, it's going to allow you to instantly go to those areas of your business and diagnose and address the issue, for what it is. So I would say, when do we do this? At least once a year. I always say, bring it into your strategic business planning, review when you create your strategic plan for the year. If you're not doing that, I suggest definitely start. We just finished up a accelerator workshop where we do strategic business planning, and we help you walk away with one. We'll be looking at doing another one in the spring if you've missed it. So you want to set up at least every year. And if it's not every year, every change of the season, if you have kind of seasonal changes in your business, it's really good to look at your pricing strategy and discuss it, with your accountant, your advisor, your team members, whoever those people are that are helping you champion profitability in your business. set up that time for them.
Yeah. I like to do it quarterly just because that's our seasonability. It just kind of changes. Like every season seems to be a little different, even though it's not. I just like to see the quarterly numbers now because that's my team knows that's how I think now in quarters. But annually at a minimum. I was in a business group and we would meet annually. And it might be the only time of the year that people looked at their numbers was at that meeting. And because of that, we would have to explain the numbers to them because they hadn't looked at them. And they would either be pleasantly surprised or disappointed because they hadn't been reviewing their numbers. Or they, and then they didn't know what kind of year they were just working really hard. And they were hardworking people. Like everybody in the green industry is. And that's why we do this, because we don't want people to struggle because it's such a hard industry to succeed in. So I would say minimum at a year, but if you can figure out how to look at it quarterly, I would encourage you strongly to do that. Even if you don't understand all the numbers at first, keep looking at them read them look at them until you get it. You'll be like, oh, okay. See the trend, see where your numbers are going. And if you're struggling, like I really struggle, people are like, oh, 40% gross profit margin, that's good enough. It's not, because if you're trying to go for a 15 or 20% profit margin, you take 20% off 40, that means there's only 20% left to pay all of the indirect cost, all of the overhead. That's not enough. That's why you need that 50, 60, 65%. Because if you take 20% off 65%, now you have 45% to pay your indirect costs and your overhead. Now that's a different conversation. Yeah. Now you can grow the business and have a real business. So different conversation, different numbers. But that's just what's helped me is the quarterly.
Yeah, and it takes a bit to get there. So if this is something that you don't feel strong in, do not feel alone. Many business owners are not strong in this area. Even, business owners who went to school for business, or finance or accounting or things like that, this is an area that they struggle. So do not feel like you're alone in this. It is a journey. It's something, start doing it if you're not. And I guarantee you in the next year or 2 years, if you're consistent with this, it's going to be a game changer for for your business.
Yeah. Yeah. 80% of business owners don't do it. But even if you just looked at some of the basic things, gross profit margin and some basic numbers, you'll be further ahead.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So today we went over, understanding your costs, direct and indirect, which we also learned that direct is also your cost of goods sold, right? So your fixed and variable, direct and indirect costs. So there's a couple little names out there for them. Not that confusing. They mean the same thing. Determine your markup. Like, what is that for your business to be profitable? Set profitable prices. This includes looking at your profit strategy, right? Your pricing strategy, and making sure that you have one for every service that you offer. So that's important. Make sure that your services are profitable. Monitor your margins. So track these. So that way you can hone in on other areas of your business that might be creating profit bleeds, and you could quickly go fix those. And then, our last topic was regularly review your pricing strategy. So, create that time and space. And I guarantee that time and space that you create to manage and review your pricing strategy is going to give you so much sanity in your business and really eliminate so much stress. It will be a game changer. You might be thinking, I don't have time to do this. Well, really, it's going to give you time to do this just by doing this process.
Yes, the old I don't have time. I get that. And if you are struggling with the time, you can just block it out. It will be worth the time. Like your business will thank you for it. And like I said, it's if you take 2 hours every quarter, that's 8 hours a year. It will be the best 8 hours, and just keep at it until you understand it. I would sit down and look at the numbers and kind of get it. And every quarter I got a little bit better. Every year I understood it a little bit more, and there's people like Christeen and me who love to help people and explain it and work with it. And so I encourage you to do it. Definitely works. It can really change the trajectory of your business.
It can. And I'm going to share a link to, if this is something that you need support on, or you're sitting there, as you're listening to this and thinking, how am I going to get there? And it's overwhelming, the idea. I'm going to share a link in the show notes. In addition to, going to our toolbox, there's some tools in there, but we do provide a triage response path. And what we basically do is we work with you for 6 weeks to really dive into this area and other areas to stop the bleed and increase that profitability. So that little program that link will be in there as well. And you'll also find a link for a checklist for this process to support you through this process if you want to sit down and start getting it implemented on a regular basis. So there's some resources in there for you.
Great resources. So one of the big fallacies in the lawn care and landscape business is that everyone needs to market and grow and SEO and all this stuff. But the reality is just knowing your numbers and knowing how to make money is how you make money. You don't have to keep growing and adding more crews and adding more services. Knowing how to make money is how to make money. So what people who don't know how to make money will tell you is you have to keep growing your business and adding services. And no, it's making money. It's making money.
Yeah, that's
the bottom line. So just wrap our heads around that. When I wrap my heads around that, it's like, oh, and then once you make money, it's way easier to grow. It's the opposite of what kind of all industries and all business tells us, right? And it's funny, customers love doing business with successful companies. It's hard to work with a company that's struggling. It's not as attractive. It doesn't feel as good. It feels much better to be doing business with other successful companies. So if you're profitable and you're successful in your company, the work just will come much more easily. So profit, money, then all the marketing. Don't try to jam yourself up with sales and going broke by selling work that you're not making money on. I've done it. And again, that's how I ended up with too much month at the end of the money. And I don't want you to be there. All right. So thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to you joining us on the next podcast. Thanks for listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast,
the show that digs into the challenges of growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit.